Hotep. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents, the H30 Art of Life show. And I'm here today with a very interesting topic, and I'm always happy when I have a topic about which I know little to nothing, because that means that I'm going to be in a position to learn. And I know that my colleague and dear friend, Kwabena Jack Childs, who is a retired attorney, is going to bring forth, because he has some new ideas about some perplexing and continuing issues in our community. So we're going to explore African world reality with Kwabena. Kwabena, first of all, I want to thank you for being my guest today, but I also want to mention that you do these presentations at the communiversity.
Yes.
And the communiversity is an old institution in and of itself. Its history has to do with our people being dissatisfied with the quality and kind of education that they were getting, and they took it upon themselves to recruit their own teachers.
Yes.
And decide what they needed to know. They decided that there were things that were missing, vital things that were missing, that they needed to know and understand. And so they were fortunate enough to find people among us who could fill in the blanks, who could help us know what we did not know so that we could do the right things at the right time. So the communiversity has been around us for a long time.
Yes.
It's housed in Northeastern Illinois University Carruthers Center for Intercity Studies on Oakwood Boulevard, and it's free. And for you to, be a retired professional who is not using your time to play badminton somewhere, but is actually giving back to the community is something commendable, and I want to commend you for it.
Thank you.
And
Thank
then
you.
I want you to talk to me about the subject, because I know that you didn't take it out of thin air. So
Right.
what's the history behind your choice of subjects today?
Well, the history behind it, and I have to thank you for inviting me and having me here today. I do appreciate it, and I have such great respect for you. So I have to get that on the record. What I saw happening over and over again was the same type of confusion and inaction worldwide in the race. Not just locally. It's just not Chicago. It's worldwide. So I began to study our people from a different analysis. I began to study them from a thinking analysis. In other words, how do black people worldwide think, and why do they think this way? It caused me to come up with some theories that I'm hashing out. One is called the illusionary syndrome system, which I believe all Africans throughout the world suffer from. And I had to create a definition. My definition is still in progress. I have it right here. For instance,
Well, let's just start
Yeah.
with, before you do it,
Yeah.
because you just said a whole mouthful.
Yeah.
So let's do illusion.
right,
An illusion is, in fact, what?
a belief in something that's not real.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
let's go back to the history of what happened to our people in 1865. This is where the present illusion began.
Okay.
There are previous illusions,
Okay.
but the present illusion began 1865. Civil War concluded. The North wins the war. But, Dr. Peace, most black people don't even realize they had a debate in Congress what to do with the black people now that the war is over. They used to call that, when I was coming up, the Negro question.
What to do with the Negro?
What to do with them. They debated for almost a year whether or not they were going to even pass the 13th Amendment. Then they had another debate on the 14th Amendment. Then they had another debate on the 15th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment are called by some the Second Constitution because that Constitution, 13, 14, 15, awarded theoretically citizenship and freedom to black people. That was not guaranteed in the first one. The first Constitution of the United States totally excludes black people as they were considered a class of inferior beings, not human, not fitting the category of citizen or person to be incorporated therein. Now, my illusion is this. 1865, black people say, oh man, the Civil War is over. We ain't tied to the plantation like we once was, blah, 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 blah. But they failed to heed the words of the Dred Scott case, which says unequivocally, blacks are not citizens. They weren't brought here for that purpose. Tawney says in the opinion, in no uncertain terms, they were never considered to be that class of individuals or people to fit what we're doing. They were not to be assimilated into our incorporate beings.
So when it says all men are created equal, black people are not included in the class of men.
Totally excluded.
All right.
That's why you have the preparation of how to characterize blacks for purposes of representation in Congress. That's how we come up. They say blacks constitute 3/5 of a human being, 3/5 of a person. The illusion is we have one day, 1865, let's say January 1865, you still not a citizen. You're not included in that. The Civil War is over, I think about April 1865. Now you think you included?
Well, the 13th Amendment.
13th Amendment hadn't been passed.
Okay.
Have you read the 13th Amendment?
I have, but I'm not as well suited to understand the 13th Amendment.
The 13th Amendment does not confer citizenship. The 13th Amendment says no group of people can be bound or held, and I won't use the word slavery because my friend Hunter Adams will get me, against their will. In other words, it was a freedom piece, only against bondage. The 14th Amendment is the amendment that technically conveys citizenship. Because why? It says all people, especially the Negro, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment were passed just for black people, by the way. The 14th Amendment is due process, equal protection under the law for blacks, because white people already had it in the 5th Amendment. That's what the 5th Amendment says. But the only thing people know about the 5th Amendment is, I'm going to take the 5th. I ain't going to tell on myself. I ain't going to testify against myself. But the 5th Amendment gave whites due process of law. That's why they can invoke it. That's why they can say, I'm not going to talk against my own interests. So the 14th Amendment technically gives the quote unquote Negro citizenship. And the 15th Amendment technically gives the Negro the right to vote. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Peace, if the 15th Amendment gave the Negro or us the right to vote, why do we need a Voting Rights Act?
I was going to ask you that question. You're getting interviewed, so you answer it.
Well, the reason being, we are a certain class of people highly identifiable by our skin color. Regardless of what hue, skin color we are, folk know we black. So they pass rules and regulations in certain southern states, for instance, that allow them to keep people from voting. Okay? If you couldn't tell them how many bubbles was in a bar of soap, or they could say, oh, you failed the test, so therefore you can't vote. So the Voting Rights Act is to curtail those type of processes that eliminate you from voting by states taking action against you. All those states had different rules. One had, can you name the 3,000 people in this, and one had how many bubbles in the bar. So I mean, it was ridiculous. But it only applied to black people. They didn't ask white people no question. So that's why you have a Voting Rights Act, which contravenes the 15th Amendment. Why you got the 15th Amendment, which specifically said blacks now had the right to vote? That was specific.
Okay, well, I just want to speak to the elephant in the room. What about the Emancipation Proclamation?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I'm so grateful you asked me that question. In his treatise, the great ancestor Lerone Bennett,
Forced into Glory.
Forced into Glory, covered that exhaustively. The Emancipation Proclamation never freed anybody. Because first of all, there was a what going on? There was a war going on. How you gonna free people in your competitors' homeland? How you gonna do that? You don't have the authority to free nobody. That's what the Emancipation Proclamation says. It says only those blacks in those southern states that have taken up arms against us are now to be free. He couldn't free them. They were still working on them plantations.
Are you saying the Confederacy had their own government?
Absolutely.
And their own flag?
They had their own
and
flag.
And their own currency?
Yes.
And their own militia?
They had
and their own legislature?
Yes.
And they seceded from the Union?
That's right.
And consequently, they weren't subject to the authority of the Union?
That's correct.
Oh, then Kiara T.H. Cheatwood, who wrote the book that preceded Lerone Bennett's book, To Save the Blood of Black Babies, and made that point by saying what I just said, was right. He said the emancipation freed people in places where there were no slaves.
Right.
And did not free them in the places where there were. Well, and I use the term slaves in the context. I understand captives.
Right.
I understand the difference, Hunter. Don't be upset.
Yeah.
We do understand that. But if you want people to understand the particular group that you're talking about, then you have to use a term that's familiar. So the familiar term is the term slaves.
Yes. And
used to label people in bondage. So if you can't free the people in bondage in the Confederate States, and there aren't people in bondage in the states that are not Confederate states, then you have written a piece of paper that is just that.
That's
it
right.
amounts only to a piece of paper. So then why are we celebrating Juneteenth?
Because we are in the illusionary syndrome system.
Well, you may go ahead now and talk about your illusionary syndrome system. I distracted you long enough.
And let me say this. This is my creation, so anybody got any problems with it, address it to me. Dr. Peace and everybody else, ain't got nothing to do with this one. The illusionary syndrome system. Patterns of perception of reviewing facts, acts, and theories of the efficacy of society and all its underpinnings as if the said analysis were the actual systems or events that were taking place. Example, Africans' belief that America is a democracy. That's an illusion. America ain't no democracy.
Well, you just can't make statements like that without basing it on something.
What is a democracy? Rule of the people. Demos, the Greek word that means people. Democracy is rule of the people. The United States of America as it is presently constituted, and as it has always been constituted, is ruled by oligarchical concerns. This country was started by rich white landowners.
Well, I would hasten to call them land possessors, because as a native population, the indigenous people who are incorrectly referred to as Indians, they always pointed out that you could not own land, you didn't create land. Land was here. They were here. They didn't think they could own land, so they never sold any land. So you just can't come over, you just can't own something if you can't buy it. And if the people who have it, who are in possession of it, don't surrender it to you because they don't think they own it, then you're not a landowner. You're something other than a landowner. You're someone who possesses property, and perhaps it may not be legal for you to do that.
Now, Dr. Peace, that's an example of the illusion. The illusion is the indigenous people on this land, which were not really the indigenous people, but I'll get into that in a minute.
Oh, well, we have to get into that right away.
Say that you can't do it, but the incursors, the people who incur on your land, say, yes, we can, and they make it happen. That's the same thing they do in Africa. The Chinese in Ghana, you can't buy and sell land, theoretically, okay? But the Chinese come in, they take the land, they build a compound, and they don't let the Ghanaians in it.
Well, they didn't buy it.
No, but they occupy it, they own it.
Okay. They own it, they occupy it.
Well, they own it.
Okay.
Because if you can't come in there, if
so
it's your land.
Ownership, you say, is based on possession.
That's right.
Or based on control.
Ownership, possession, and control are all intermingled.
Okay. All right.
Okay?
I will let you do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I'm just giving you an example. That becomes an illusion. You saying you can't buy and sell land, but the European comes and takes your land and is buying and selling it every day and twice on Sunday.
But that doesn't create an owner out of someone who comes and takes something.
Well, what do you call it? If they ain't owning it, we gonna go downtown and look at downtown Chicago.
No, I'm not saying that they don't claim ownership, and I'm not saying that they don't control the land they say they own. But I am saying that this land is my land, this land is your land, because land is God-given.
Well, according to my historical information, the United States of America, or North America, was first inhabited by African people called the Folsom people. The Folsom people were here first, and then the Asiatics came down through the Bering Straits, intermingled and intermarried with the Folsom people. And that's how you get the people they call Indians.
Well, I'm not unfamiliar with the fact that Africans were here, because I think there may even be a book called The African Presence in the Americas, and I do know that John G. Jackson has a chapter in Man, God, and Civilization called Ancient America, in which he talks about what this land was before it was called America.
Right.
Before it was named America. And I do know that Lorenzo Turner did a lot of research on the language and found that there were African words and African references in the English language even that came from Africans who obviously were here.
That's right.
And the other thing is that it just makes sense to me that if you had captives who could run away from the plantation, they could do that because they knew where they were going. Mm-hmm. Even if you're in captivity, you just don't run out in the vastness, not having a destination, not knowing where else you can go, because you could run from that into danger. So you had to know the terrain in order to think that you could escape. And I don't think Harriet Tubman was an unintelligent woman given what she did. And if Harriet Tubman walked off that plantation, she knew where she was going, and if she came back and got people and took them with her, she knew where she was taking them. So that tells us, that supports your understanding that Africans were here before the Mayflower, as Lerone Bennett's book says, and
Right.
before Columbus, that they were here,
Right.
that they knew this place. But I do know that most Africans remained on the continent because the continent was the motherland.
Right.
So to be on the motherland, I think, is still important to African people.
Absolutely. But the Folsom people
Okay.
been here at least 25,000 years.
Okay.
So that predates the Asian people.
Okay.
Now, if you got black people and then you have yellow people,
Okay.
and those black people and yellow people intermarry,
Okay.
you end up with red people.
Okay.
Now, the one thing that's overlooked is that, because people are talking about they came over here. No, they were already here.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
if there was be but one thing that we could convince people of, is that we were not brought anywhere. That the first time we step foot on this soil, we were not in chains. We were not
Right.
disembarking from a slave ship, but that we were already here. How do you explain the, quote, free Negroes?
Right.
They were freed by whom?
Right.
They never had been in bondage.
Right.
So I'd like the reference for the Folsom people. I'd like that reference because many times when we talk about this, I guess this is one of our illusions. Many times when we talk about the indigenous people of this land, we think of them as the people who have been misnamed Indian.
Right.
We think of them and so we feel somewhat guilty that, as somebody said, the black man fought with the white man to take the land away from the Indians. I don't think that we co-conspired with anybody to take land away from anybody who didn't own the land and who weren't the original people on the land. And it stands to reason also that black people being the first people could very well be the first people on all the continents.
Right.
And the continents were once one continent.
Right.
They weren't all separated.
Well, let's get back to something you said about who are the people. Another thing we have to understand, like you said, a lot of blacks do have guilt. Talk about the Buffalo Soldiers beat up the Indians and all that. That's a bunch of bunk. The 5 civilized tribes held slaves. That's why they were called the 5 civilized tribes. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yes.
That's why I said I'm glad to be here, because I get to learn.
The Trail of Tears occurred because those guys, the 5 civilized tribes, sided with the Confederacy. After they had a treaty with the United States, they broke the treaty and fought with the Confederacy. So when they lost the war, the United States government forced them out of the South and made them march west. During the march, they took their slaves. In 1866, the United States government had to tell them, release the slaves, the war is over. You can't hold slaves no more. They were still holding slaves. They had 12,000 more of our people in bondage after the Civil War was over. So be getting all upset is a real waste of time because we should be mad at them and asking them for some reparations along with the white folk.
Well, they don't have anything to offer.
Oh, they got plenty.
Oh,
They got
really?
plenty.
That's one of my illusions?
Yes.
Okay.
They
Well,
have them because, listen, they are in a gilded cage.
some.
No, the ones that ain't is just like any other group that you see some white people out begging for money.
Okay.
That don't stop white people from being in power and control.
Okay.
That's
so,
just some people that fell off the table.
So you're talking about have-nots?
That's right.
Okay.
And I'm saying to you, when they created what they call, and Dr. Claude Anderson is a master at this because he didn't file lawsuits about this.
Mm-hmm.
The Dawes Act, the $5 Indians. You could register and say you had Indian blood when they created the Dawes Act some long time ago. So that's why you had people like Elizabeth Warren saying, I got Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Does she look like an Indian to you?
No.
She's a $5 Indian. And they getting the casinos and they getting other perks. They get money on them reservations. They get an allotment.
The only genuine, quote, Indian that I ever met was one who lived in the same public housing project where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
And they were extremely poor. And it was, it was a travesty that, they had to ask neighbors for, they would borrow like flour and bacon drippings.
Yeah.
So they can make gravy.
Yeah.
And it was just sad. So I went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get public aid because Illinois required you to be a resident for a year mm-hmm. before you were even eligible for public aid. I don't really know how they got in public housing, but they were there. But I went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs on their behalf, and I was told that they left the reservation without permission.
There you go.
And if you leave the reservation without permission, you're on your own.
That's correct.
And so they were on their own, and they were starving, and they were behind in their rent. And, our community was doing all we could.
Rallying, like we always do.
Yeah, to support them and try to keep the roof and keep the children clothed and keep the family eating. But it was quite a burden. And the father made the mistake, or in some way got involved in alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I do understand why they call alcohol spirits.
Yeah.
Because it took him outside himself. He was not the same person at all. And I've heard that was one of the ways that they conquered those people. That they introduced rot gut.
Yeah, that's true.
Into their community.
But that's true.
In the same way drugs have been introduced into ours.
Yes, and
corrupted
right.
them.
Alcohol, if somebody has done the study, I don't know about it, but I think alcohol does not work with their physiology mm-hmm. because it has a terrible effect on them, okay? But also they're suffering from illusions because if they'd have stayed on the reservation, they'd have got their allotment. Mm-hmm. They could have still went to a town and got a job. They would just need to stay on the reservation.
Well, you see, I was naive. I was a leader in my community, and I was looking out for the people in my community, including my own family. And so that it seemed to me social services were needed, and there's a Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're the ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But see, we all suffer from these illusions because we have a lack of information.
Right.
See, we're not informed, and this is what is happening to the black people in the world today. They're not informed. Mm-hmm. First of all, why would you think somebody else is going to help you that put you in the predicament you in the first place? This system is not designed to pull you out the hole.
Well, it's not let's for the benefit of the doubt, I would defend by saying that it's not that you expect help from someone who put you in the position that you're in, but if they are the only ones who can help you, or you perceive them to be the only ones that can help you, you ask for help from where you think help can come. You can't ask your impoverished brother to help you because he's in the same condition that you are. So you try to use moral suasion, which King has already said does not work. You know, you try to somehow get some kind of compassion or sympathy going that will, allow for some handout, some kind of meager.
But see, that's the illusion right there.
Okay.
People have power amongst themselves. The aggregation of a people creates power. Now, we've been programmed to believe, oh, you can't do nothing by yourself. That's what the ancestor Bobby E. Wright used to talk about, the rugged individualist theory.
Peace be upon him.
Yes, right. That's a con game. Let me ask you something. Have you seen
You
it?
can't interview me.
No, I'm
the
sorry.
interviewer. You the interviewee.
I just have to throw these questions out because
Okay.
just think about it. Have you ever seen a Chinese say we want to integrate?
I don't see them because they are down in their community. If I get a traffic ticket and I go to traffic court, I don't see them.
That's right.
If I lose my job and go to the unemployment office, I don't see them. If I'm without income and I have to go to an office to get welfare or food stamps or a card, I don't see them. So it's kind of like the people who we call Indians. I don't see them.
That's right.
If I go to the town that they named, I will see them. I will see them in their places of business. I will see them in foot traffic and in traffic on the street. I will see them, but I will not see them in my community, and I will not see them in the public places that I go unless they're places of choice.
Except you will see them with those restaurants in your community.
Oh, well, you just it's kind of like invisible, right before your eyes, hidden in plain sight. You actually don't see that your community is that the store owners,
right,
the proprietors in your community are not you. You actually just go in and out of places all day long,
That's the illusion.
And you're just asleep.
Right.
You're just sleepwalking. You don't see what's around you.
But my point is this. They come here. If you go to O'Hare Airport, they got 2 flights every week going back and forth to China. The people getting off those flights, a lot of them can't even speak English. They come here, and the reason why you don't see them in the unemployment, the reason why you don't see them, because they get jobs when they come here. They hire each other. That's why they have restaurants stacked on top of each other. That's commerce. That money goes up and down the road, up and down Chinatown. My point to you is, you don't see them saying, we have to integrate. Have you ever heard an Arab say to you?
Did we ask to integrate?
Yes, we did. That was
I
the program.
thought we asked for equal. I think there's a difference between
It is.
asking for equal treatment under the law and having to move out of your neighborhood or go out of your school to be treated equally. Why do you have to? Why is it you that have to leave in order to get the things that you are entitled to get and deserve?
That's right. But I heard a debate, and not a debate, but a discussion on radio just yesterday.
Okay.
Talking about, will Chicago get more integrated? And I'm saying to all the black people in Chicago, what made Chicago great What made Chicago the center of black business was that all the black people lived together. And they fostered business. They supported business. And when they moved out, the businesses collapsed. Mm-hmm. Have you seen an Arab asked to integrate?
I don't see them except in stores in my community.
But they all around you. But you ain't seen them saying, get on TV and say, we're going to have a march because we feel we need to be integrated.
Well, if you already have, if you're meeting your needs, you don't have to go any places. Only us that have to go somewhere to get our needs met.
You ain't seen no East Indians saying, we need to integrate. They buying up all the Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin Robbins. And they give each other jobs. They have virtual zero unemployment. Arabs have virtual zero unemployment. Chinese have virtual zero unemployment.
But Kwabena, what we were asking for were schools in which our children could receive quality education. What we were asking for were better schools, better housing, better maintenance of neighborhoods, because you know you could have potholes and dead trees and all kinds of other things in our community. It didn't seem as though anybody was housekeeping the community. We didn't have elected officials that saw to it that you know the property was maintained, the public property was maintained. So all we wanted was to live in decent housing, to send our children to good schools, to have what we could see clearly other people had, and they didn't have to make a great effort to have it. So our interest was in simply having what we were entitled to have. But the condition that was placed on it, that in order to have this, now you got to bus your children into the white neighborhood, to the white school, and put them at risk, make them vulnerable. Now you got to travel to the other side of the moon to work on a job if you want to work. So now you have to make a lot of changes in your life and endure a lot of hardship in order to have what other people are getting without having to do anything except be in the world and be white.
But that's my point. That's an illusion. Why do you think they're going to help you? They ain't helped us yet. See, we could help ourselves by joining together. Between 1865 and 1895, the black literacy rate went from 0 to about 45%. They ain't had no good schools. They ain't had no good books. And they didn't have no university-trained teachers. How did they do it?
I don't know, because I once went to a country school. My father was a farmer.
Yeah.
And my parents separated when I was very young, but I lived in the South with my father when I was out of school. And so sometimes school would start back before the schools in the North started, and I got to go to school that had a grade per bench. The first grade was on this bench, and second, and so forth and so on. I don't really remember how high up the grades went, but there was one teacher who taught all the children. The children were not unruly.
Right.
There was no bedlam and boisterousness.
They appreciated.
The people on the first row did their assignments, and the people that I went to school with were bright people like myself, you know, and they went on to other schools, high school or whatever, when you left the little country school.
Right.
But the point was that we were educating our children under remarkable conditions.
And turning out geniuses.
Well, turning out people who went to other schools and went to colleges and got degrees. My grandmother was a teacher. My aunts were teachers. My sister was a teacher. And it was not because they had the advantages
That's correct.
of this other kind of education, but it appeared to us And we were told that education was the key because you go to school to get a good job.
Right. Another myth.
Well, if you go to school, you get a good education first, and then that leads to a good job. Now, I don't want to talk about the number of people that I know who have good educations and who are unemployed because that's depressing. It's hard to believe
Because
that
who's
you
the
can know
employer?
people with masters
Right.
and MBAs and all kinds of specialized training who are unemployed, not because they are lazy and
That's right.
trifling, but because there simply is no place in the economy.
Because who do you have to go to for a job?
The people who control the economy.
And who is that?
I don't know. I haven't looked for a job in a while.
But that's my point. My point is that's the illusion that started in 1865. In 1865, our people refused to countenance the fact that Roger B. Taney, in his famous the opinion in Dred Scott, said, black people were never brought here and meant to be citizens, and therefore they are not citizens. If they
Is that the same decision that said a black man has no rights?
That's correct.
That a white man is bound to respect?
That's correct. That decision has never been overturned. That decision was superseded, and you know the difference. When I say supersede or overturn, that decision was superseded by basically the 13th, 14th Amendments. That superseded that opinion. That opinion is still good law. And I remember being young and hearing ancestor Dr. Bobby Wright said, hey, we the only people that's been created by legislative fiat. If they overturn it, we back into chattelhood. Think about that.
I don't want to think about that.
Because you know the president might do it. Not the president, because that's another illusion.
You
like
know,
he's
it's
doing
just,
about it.
I don't want to take you from that. Keep that. I just think that it's interesting that we don't see ourselves in all the places that we are.
Right.
And in terms of the various difficulties that we have had to face and that we have, in fact, survived. Because when you think about what happened in Nazi Germany, you don't think that there were any black people over there. There were.
Yes.
And it's hard to know that we have participated in virtually every historical event, every Holocaust. We had the Ma'afa ourselves, and then
Right.
we were included in the Holocaust.
Right.
And everything that affects other people seems to affect black people. We seem to be directly, not indirectly, affected by what happens in the world, but we are affected by everything, and yet we don't see ourselves
Right.
as having suffered to the extent that we have suffered. But the other people who suffer build museums, and they never let you forget that they suffered, and they do not intend to suffer again. So do we have an illusion about these matters that could lead to a need to awaken so that we don't face any further suffering?
I think the psychological community would say we're in denial. We're in denial. See, and the illusion.
We got 5 minutes to get out of denial.
Yeah, but we're in trouble now. But we're in denial because the only people who can help us is us. Ain't nobody else gonna help you.
So what are we going to do?
We
I
have
want to
to-
do it in 5 minutes.
We have to aggregate ourselves.
Okay,
We have to aggregate the intelligence and the resources that we do have.
Okay.
See, we have resources, but they're not aggregated.
But you see, the thing is, I remember someone making a speech saying that Mark Twain said the solution to all the problems is to boil the ocean. And somebody said, well, how do you boil the ocean? He says, I don't know, but that's the solution. So when we say that we need to aggregate ourselves, that's the solution. How do we boil the ocean?
The first thing we need to do, Dr. Peace, is to create a social theory.
Bobby
See,
Wright was saying that too.
Hey, now, and it's true then, it's true now.
What is a social theory?
Rules of behavior and conduct among a people.
Okay. Who would be vested with the authority to do it? Because, you know, we don't care much for our own authority. Our children sometimes don't want to obey the parental authority.
That's true.
So
we have to create that. In other words, we have to create a group.
We have to agree.
That we have to agree in a small group, not a big group, not waiting on masses of people.
Okay.
The masses of people are basically confused.
Okay.
They will argue with you over the smallest of things. If you say, let's go left, they say, oh no, I think right's the best way.
Okay.
So you have to have a group of single-minded people say, hey, this is what's going to be our social theory, and start applying it. Once they become successful, once you can see they own and control something, you say, oh, maybe I just go over there with them.
I want to give you the example of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They started poisoning the cattle. They wanted 5 states. They wanted to separate. They don't want to be in it. They want to be, you know, they want to be out of it and just be independent. And they established businesses and they did a lot of things and they had a lot of discipline, but it was sabotaged on every hand.
Well, you have to make allowances for the sabotage because you have to understand when you create business, you're creating a third rail against something. You think you're just doing business. No such thing as just doing business. No such thing. You have to be prepared totally for what you're doing because your business is interfering with somebody's market share. If you start a hamburger joint, McDonald's might start looking at you saying, whoa, you're taking a little market share from us in this district. And they won't do nothing because they're a global corporation of the highest magnitude. They might just say, hey, we ain't gonna worry about you. Some other folk might get concerned. And that's what happened. Also, you
got 1 minute. How are you going to do it?
Honorable Elijah Muhammad had an ideology. We have to have an ideology. But I suggest to you this. No ideology that focuses on religion can work. Because religion is a horizontal. You need a vertical move. That includes all people. See, I suggest to you that anybody can belong to any religion they want. You shouldn't be arguing about that. How you gonna argue with somebody how they praying to God? That's not an argument. But how we build houses, how we build schools, how we do math, how we clean our water, that's a different story.
Well, you know what, you're doing a hit and run right now because you knew I kept telling you about the time.
Right.
So now you get to the end of it. Well, I did interrupt you a time or two, but you get to the end of it and you start talking about religion. You know, that's just get people riled up. You're gonna have to come back. We have to do a part 2.
All right.
All right.
I'll be glad to do it.
Thank you, Kwaba. Now, this time went so quickly.
Yes,
I didn't have no idea that it was ending.
It's always a pleasure to be here with you, Dr. Peace, because you're so provocative.
Well,
and you ask such good questions. I'm telling you.
Thank you. I'm glad that you feel that way because I just wanted to make you say things that I know that you will say. Never gonna be afraid to speak your mind.
I hope not. My daddy would be proud of me. Continue on that avenue.
Okay.
I got that from him.
Okay. Well, now they playing the music, so that tells me that we talking to each other. We're not on.
All right.
We're not on TV.